All right, the recording has begun. Welcome everyone to today's Brown Bag session, February 18th, 2021. We have two wonderful presenters here today. The first presentation will be offered by Jeff Moss. Jeff Moss is with Podium. Podium currently holds a state contract. You can see that represented here on the screen. Followed by the Podium presentation, we will have Justin Dalton within the Division of Purchasing offering a presentation on cost evaluation methodologies. We thank you for your time here, spending your lunch hour with us. To ensure you get the greatest benefit of your time with us, we'd ask and encourage you to participate in the discussion here, whether that is as appropriate, unmuting your microphone, interjecting with a question or a comment adding to the discussion, or if you're most comfortable, posting a comment or requesting to the chat. We will be monitoring the chat and addressing questions as they come in. For your presentation, Jeff, if you want to just keep an eye on it, and I will also do the same. And if a question is received, we'll offer that. Focusing first on the Podium presentation. Just a bit of background, the Podium contract was awarded from the IT Solutions for Pandemic solicitation that was conducted a few months back. As many of you would recall, not only was there a good number of vendors awarded under that solicitation, but we have held brown bags previously highlighting any one of those contracts. Podium will be a highlighted contract here. And as we go throughout today's presentation, would like to encourage all of you who is participating, offer your feedback on the overall session here, and notably as we invite vendors to offer a presentation here. Part of the purpose here is almost offering like a reverse trade show. NIGP offered one of those in a much grander scale just over a year ago. But as we invite a vendor in to offer a summary of what they have to offer, providing your feedback as to what you see is helpful. Also, if you use a contract, use any one of our state contracts that you think would be helpful to highlight to the other public entities here in the state, feel free to reach out to myself, Solomon Kingston at State Purchasing, and more than happy to connect with you and the vendor and see if we can't get something lined up. This is something we are offering to all vendors on state contract, and as far as offering it to all of them, selectively identifying which solutions would be the most beneficial to offer in a presentation of this type. Definitely open to your feedback. With that, we'll go ahead and turn the time over to Jeff Moss and Podium and go from there.
Great. Thanks, Solomon, and I'm happy to be here with everybody. Like Solomon said, my name is Jeff Moss. I work here at Podium. Podium is in Lehigh, kind of in the middle of that whole part of Thanksgiving Point where the freeway doesn't really make sense. So that's where we're at. We've been around for about six years now. Have grown quite substantially, and we're actually helping over 65,000 different businesses worldwide to essentially be able to communicate with their customers in the most efficient and preferred ways possible. So I'm going to share my screen here. Hang on one second. And pull this up. Hopefully you can all see this. In fact, I'm going to ask because I can only see what I'm sharing. Solomon, can you see this, or can everyone see this?
Yep, we see your slide deck that you're sharing.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So what I want to focus on today is, look, we are primarily, or basically aside from a few use cases, today we are primarily working in the private sector. And there's a lot of information and data we can glean from the private sector because the citizens of Utah are customers to the private sector. And so I want to show, what is Podium doing to help in today's world in the private sector, and how can we actually bring that to the public? and really bring the conveniences of businesses within the private sector to create efficiencies internally and conveniences for the citizen and working with the government. So as far as an agenda goes, I was told I have till 12:30. I'm actually going to go. I'm going to try and make this about 10 to 15 minutes because I know anything longer can get a little old. So I'm going to go quick, but obviously went through the intro. I'm going to go through what we know, why Podium, a private sector use case, jump into how we can apply that to the public sector, and then what is an average cost, or maybe not average cost, but what is a cost for someone we're helping today within the public sector. This is essentially what we know. Let's actually jump into this so we can make this a little bit bigger here. Look, we as customers are demanding more and more, and because as customers we're demanding more from the businesses we transact with, it's also causing us to demand more and more from the different branches of government we're working with on a day-to-day basis. And it's hard to keep up with all of these demands. And where we have been, we're now working with the state of Utah through the RFP that was specific to COVID-related technologies. One thing to glean from that is, yes, demands are definitely heightened because of COVID, but the industry or essentially the way that customers want to transact with businesses was already starting to change even pre-COVID. And COVID really just dumped gasoline on the entire shift from how customers want to communicate with businesses, how people want to be mobile in all of their actions. And one thing I always like to say is, frankly, if you think about errands, right? If we're looking to run our errands on Saturday or whatever, we no longer as a people run our errands during a specific time necessarily, whereas we try to run our errands all at once if we can, right? We want to multitask as people today and complete as many tasks as quickly as possible. And what makes that difficult is communication. And so communication methods or classic communication methods today can become very cumbersome and expensive on both ends, whether it's the citizen or the specific sector or branch within government. So what does that mean is, how do we meet those expectations? How do we create an experience that is different? And how much does that actually mean to the citizen? And, this is talking about the private sector, but the experience that businesses give today is more important than price and product, and is really the brand differentiator versus anything else out there. So it's, what's it going to be like when I transact with you, or what is my experience going to be like when I'm working with you? And can you meet those demands? And those demands are coming from businesses that we work with every single day, right? If you think about your experience with Amazon, you can do almost whatever you want there, right? I mean, you can purchase whatever, it comes straight to your door and you're ready to rock and roll. Now, what's difficult about Amazon is, because all of us transact with Amazon almost every day, what that puts in the citizen's mind is, well, if Amazon can do it, why can't my local government do that? There's all kinds of different applications there. So talking about communication specifically, if you look at what we're using today and what we use primarily today in most businesses, is we're emailing and we're making phone calls, and in some cases we're even faxing. And the problem with that is, if we go back to the example of, I want to multitask as a citizen, if I'm on the phone with someone, I can't do anything else. I'm on the phone and that's it. That's the end of it. Whereas if I'm messaging with a business, I can be messaging with multiple places. I can be taking care of my kids while I'm texting, the DMV, figuring out what I need to figure out, so I know what I need to bring, to make sure that the transaction is completed as quickly as possible. And on the flip side of that, as a entity, think about the ability of how many more conversations you can manage and the efficiency you can create just by opening up the ability to manage multiple conversations through messaging versus, tying up all of your capability to multitask on your day-to-day by just being on the phone. And so because that's what people want, not only does it create a better experience for the citizen, but it's also creating efficiency and allowing, the businesses we work with today to complete more tasks at a more efficient rate and frankly, reduce costs because of that. So here are some stats that go through that. Like I said, I'm going to send this deck out, so I don't want to spend too much time here because I think the most interesting part of this is like, how do we do this, right? What are some examples of this? But if we're talking about how do we keep our citizens engaged in specific instances if we need to, or we need to get a hold of someone, just remember that on average, we're checking our phones 150 times a day. Now that's probably primarily Instagram and our messages application or text messaging application, but that's where we want to be, right? If we want to communicate with someone, we need to be in the middle of wherever that communication platform is. So if we're talking about Podium specifically, what we do is these are just some of the products that we offer. What you're seeing on the right is the inbox. You'll notice, and we'll look at this a little bit more in depth, but you'll notice the inbox looks pretty much like Outlook or Gmail in the sense that you can manage all of your different messaging conversations across all of the different channels, primarily text messaging and a web chat, to be able to essentially facilitate whatever type of transaction you need to facilitate with that citizen. This platform allows you to send and receive not only just messages, but images, documents. You can actually add a web chat widget to your website and allow citizens to actually start conversations directly from your website via text. And you can manage these different conversations on the go as well, through different platforms, whether it be mobilely or from your desktop. Another really important piece of this is we can also, because we can start bringing all of this different communication one-to-one within Podium, we can now leverage these specific types of communication channels for things like review requests or feedback type surveys, and even collect payments or create payment reminders, or even automate specific messages to go out to a citizen based on different types of inflection points. For example, a really common automation is to confirm an appointment or to remind someone of an appointment. Or if someone says, I have an appointment, you could also use this to remind that person of what types of things they need to have ready when they actually arrive for their appointment. How many times do we have a specific transaction we're trying to complete with a citizen or a customer, and we can't complete it because the customer or citizen did not bring everything they needed to bring to that specific meeting. Again, the use cases here are limitless, and I think the best way to think about it is any type of communication you're doing through a phone and primarily email, you can move all those types of communications to a text, which is, again, where the citizen prefers to communicate and where we can create a lot of efficiency within different processes. So I want to talk through a use case here. Just two of our customers that are here in Utah, Larry H. Miller and Golden West Credit Union. So if you've ever purchased a car from Larry H. Miller, you may have noticed that you're able to start a conversation from their website. They can text you during that conversation. They can send you pictures of the vehicles. You can actually you can finish your entire transaction through Larry H. Miller, purchase the car all through your phone, show up, pick up the car, and drive away. Just one really strong use case that I'm sure a lot of you have probably gone through as you've transacted with Larry H. Miller or any of their dealerships. Same thing with Golden West Credit Union. If you are a member there and you have recently, signed up for their insurance policies, work with their insurance agents, or if you've refied or anything like that, you may have noticed that you received a text message to leave them feedback. which then posts directly to Google so that more people understand the great experience the Golden West provides. Just a couple of examples of how they're utilizing text messaging today to complete processes that are important to them. Now, we are currently working with the state surplus, and are one really fantastic way to see how this works live would actually be to click this link, which I'm going to send in the chat right now. And you can experience this yourselves and how we've brought this private type of technology to the public here and within the public sector. So here we are. And then I'm also going to send this deck out to Solomon to be able, so he can repurpose this and send it out to all of you. So you can go through this information. And then finally here, as far as pricing goes, this is just an idea of what state surplus is purchasing or paying right now is just over $10,000. So the ability to actually manage two-way conversations via text, be able to pass those conversations to each other, be notified of those conversations, allow your citizens to start those conversations from your website, use this to automate specific messages, all that kind of stuff it's not super expensive, and it is absolutely very efficient and can help a lot. So if this is something you guys want to continue the conversation with, this is my information. Again, I'm going to send out this deck so you guys have this information. And finally, this is our overall product suite that we have talked about today. So you'll have this and within that deck. So I wanted to stop there and actually give the time over to you guys, to you all, if any of you have any questions for me.
Any questions from anyone based on what you've seen? Feel free to either unmute or post those in the chat if you have any.
Okay.
And
great.
I just repost. For those who joined later and didn't see the earlier chat, I did just repost the link to the Podium state contract. That's the link to their contract, as they are a cooperative contract holder. A comment, no questions, but it looks like an amazing program. So anything more from your end, Jeff?
No, I think that's it for me. I'm just typing out my information in case any of you want to get in contact with me to explore the use case that you guys are thinking. But again, I think the best way to think about this is one, if you haven't ever experienced anything like this, jump onto Larry H. Miller, jump onto the State Surplus website and experience it for yourself and see how convenient it can be. But if you have any ideas of, hey, we want to introduce text messaging to our specific branch here, reach out to me and let's talk about it and let's see how we can do that efficiently and put something in place for you all. So really appreciate the time, and my information's in the chat. Feel free to give me a call or shoot me a text or send me an email.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for your time here. And one thing to just quickly highlight that Jeff noted in his presentation is, even though the contract award was done under the IT Solutions for Combating Pandemics RFP, this is not a COVID, solely a COVID-related system or solution. It is available widespread. It was available well before the pandemic hit. And as far as the contract term, there is interest from public entities in the state contract. This contract, as it was competitively solicited and awarded, is not going away when COVID, fortunately, whenever that is, goes away. And so as the contract is in place, please do reach out to Podium. Would like any additional details, would like a more targeted demo on what you saw here today. Jeff is an available resource. I worked with him just a little bit as we've rolled out the surplus solution, and Jeff is a great guy to work with.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Same to you. Well, thank you, everybody. I guess, Solomon, should I jump off since my presentation's over?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you, Jeff. Have a good one.
Well, thank you all.
All right. That brings us to the second presentation we have here today. We have a presentation by Justin Dalton, who will be presenting on cost evaluation methodologies. Similar to the first presentation, if anyone has any questions or comments, please do interject those or monitoring the chat. If there's an appropriate pause in the presentation, feel free to unmute your microphones and interject that. With that, though, we'll turn the time over to you, Justin.
Great. Thank you, Solomon. So big shoes to fill following Jeff there, I guess. I'm not a vendor, so I guess you have that going for you. You can at least are required to listen to me now versus you get to choose to listen to a vendor. But with that being said, happy and excited to present to you guys today, talking about some cost methodologies. So I will present my screen. Got a PowerPoint here. I will just reiterate again, though, please do ask questions throughout the process. I'll pause at various points throughout the process, kind of explaining and demonstrating where I'm at or kind of what where my presentation is going, and feel free to ask any questions at any point in time. With that being said, I'll jump right in. So cost methodology, a market basket cost situation, something that I came across as I was doing an RFP, and so came to fruition that here's a situation we can train on and hopefully give some guidance and advice to everybody as well. So I guess before I even kind of jump into this as well, I'll reiterate the fact that the bulk of my training today and around cost is focused around Part 7 of the procurement code. So 63G, 6A, Part 7, which is RFPs, requests for proposals. As you can imagine, cost methodologies are all over the place, and they can be all over the place as allowed by Part 7. So that's perfectly fine as long as that cost methodology is clearly stated, transparent, posted and published as part of your solicitation, all of the above, as long as it's possible there, or as long as it's all posted and public, it's possible, essentially. With that being said, though, there's probably some cost ideas and kind of methodologies that I'll be taking from the bid process, just because of how it kind of consistently works and transitions over to an RFP as well. So if you're not familiar with anything that I've just said, don't worry. We'll get into all of it today, and I'll show you some examples. But first and foremost, what is a market basket? You've probably heard the analogy before or seen it, or people throw out these keywords and talk about it, but what does it mean? So a couple bullet points just to explain, and then some red highlights as well. So a market basket is a collection of top-selling goods and services consistently purchased together. So red highlight there as purchased together, meaning it's a basket. It's not just buying one item here and then one item there. This is a group of things that we're wanting to buy. Widgets, whatever you want to call it. So next, it's a small sample size of items from a larger category that represent the category as a whole. So for example, let's say it could be auto parts. There's a billion different auto parts, and we don't necessarily want to do a huge list of 1,000 auto parts that we want to itemize out and get a cost for every single one. But so maybe we take the top 10 items in that bigger picture of a whole category, but it's a sample size of it. So, and then lastly on this bullet point here is the collection of items and services are used to evaluate cost on the solicitation that are proportionate to what is expected to be purchased from the resulting contract. So that one's a little bit harder and kind of the bulk of where I'm going to be going with my conversation today. But what that means is that it's kind of a scenario. We're building out something of, here's just a portion or a sample size or something that we're going to be doing, but it's more related to the expectations of what we're actually going to be buying on the contract. I'm talking also from a statewide perspective, because we do at state purchasing, we do obviously all the statewide contract solicitations. And as such, those solicitations typically they don't result in one vendor for one project. It's typically multiple vendors for multiple projects, because it could be potentially used by any executive branch agency, cities, counties, schools, municipalities, all of that. So I'm keeping in mind a large spectrum of how it could potentially be. So I'll pause here for just a second. Does anybody have anything to add? Maybe you have some good ideas of what's your definition of a market basket, or do you have any questions so far?
Just interjecting real quick. For larger solicitations, one consideration that we've run into in state purchasing is we identify the market basket and those items that will be included in that, and also taking into account the wide variety and scale that the contract may be used for, is accounting for small vendors in the industry to be able to participate in that. And structurally, as we list an item in a market basket, is a vendor may offer a subset or portion of the complete market basket, really arriving at a fine line. There is no silver bullet as to exactly how many items to include in the market basket. But one factor in that analysis is the items identified is require vendors to submit a proposal specifically for those items that results in excluding maybe a smaller player or a vendor who is focused on only a subset portion of the market. And so just a consideration that we've had to be mindful of as we create something like that.
Thank you, Solomon. Once again, I'll just kind of say, please feel free to comment, make any additional comments or concerns or questions along as we go through. So thank you to Solomon. Thank you for everybody else so far. So I wanted to break into scenarios. A scenario is telling a story of what is, eventually, potentially going to be purchased. And the reason I kind of define it like that as a story is it paints the picture for the vendors as they're reading this scenario. How are they going to bid on this? How are they going to propose? Because if we just say we want to buy some licenses, well, that's great. That's only part of the picture. What are those licenses going to do? I guess I should take a step back. So my background is in IT, and at the state, I do a tremendous amount of the IT procurements. So that's where a lot of my analogies will probably come from, is the software world. And that's where I'll start to talk about a lot of this as well. So when I talk about licensing, you'll know it's because my IT background there, I guess. So what should a scenario have as an example here? So a couple of the 4 bullet points down below. What's the implementation going to be like? What other systems does it need to work with? What about quantities? Different kinds of trainings or different kinds of roles that we need for our employees. Like maybe there's a sysadmin, but then there's just a normal end user, and maybe there's a stakeholder type of a role that we need to be able to utilize it. Maybe there's a public role to where we're displaying dashboards publicly and we need to have people view those. So all kinds of different scenarios as it could come up and potentially be of what's happening. You've probably heard our director, Christopher Hughes. He's said it multiple times, and I love this, but we really should, I didn't even put it in the PowerPoint. I should have. I probably will adjust that afterwards. But he asked the question, or states that we should ask the question all the time in our brain, and kind of even to our vendors, of saying, or not even a question, but more of a statement to say, here's our problem, or here's our scenario, here's our solution, or here's our situation, and then asking the vendors to provide us with a solution. Rather than, what we don't want to do is tell the vendors, this is exactly what we need, this is the solution we want you to provide us. if we're trying to do that, then it's probably a bid, and it makes sense. Like if we're buying parts, because we know exactly what we want. We know we have to buy tires for a truck or brakes. I'm going back to the auto parts analogy there, but we know exactly what we need to buy because it's specific to the job we're doing. In this world, though, of RFPs, a lot of times we don't really know exactly because we're not the experts. We might be an expert in one piece of that puzzle, but not the whole huge picture. So once again, I'll reiterate it, and I've slaughtered it a couple of times here, but here's our problem, here's our situation, asking the vendors to provide us with a solution. So keeping that in mind as well. Any comments or questions about that?
You have a question on the chat board, Justin, from Mike Long.
Oh, great.
How common is it to use a market basket approach in a solicitation now? It seems to me we've been using it more over the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's a great question. And so I guess I can only historically speak for the last 4 years, which is how long I've been here at the state. But I would agree that it's become more and more common within the last 2 years, I would say, especially because as we've kind of transitioned our methodology and our mindset of that same question that we just said. Here's our problem, provide us with a solution. I'm not saying that you have to do this. Obviously, there's a time and a place for like a bid or a specific cost methodology if you know exactly what you need and want. So Mike Long, I know that he's with Parks and Rec. So let's say he has a specific need for, I don't know, Mike, give me an example. The Christmas lights. I know that was one of the things that you guys did. The Christmas lights at one of the parks that you guys have. So that's a super specific thing. We kind of know exactly what we want. We know that it's exactly going to be this. Okay, so he replied back with park entrance signs. So great, we know exactly what we want. We know we want these signs. We know they need to be green because they need to match the rest of the state. So we know kind of all the scope of work and the specs. In that situation, it probably does not make sense to do a market basket because you know exactly what you need. But in the fact where you're working on a project that's kind of an agile or a flexible project where it might change down the road, you might not need green signs. Maybe now you want them to be LEDs and you want them to change and you want them to whatever, all kinds of different situations that could come up. That's when the market basket really is applicable because there could be multiple options and variables.
I was just going to say, Justin, and I've been seeing market baskets being done more often within our office because we're getting a catalog of items on contract as opposed to those specific items you're talking about, so that we have more variety within the contract itself. So we'll have a few items to represent a catalog and then have all of those items on contract.
Great. Thank you, Sherilyn. Yes. I couldn't have said it better as well. So 100% when a catalog is involved, perfect scenario for this market basket. Okay, great discussion so far, everyone. And thank you, Mike. Please, everybody else, continue to ask some questions if they come up. So, okay. So an example that I'll give here of something that you could potentially use. So once again, I'm kind of having the mindset of some software or some kind of a platform IT solution of what's going to be happening. So an example that we would say in our posting out to the vendors is we would say something like this: when providing your costs, please use the following scenario. And here's all the bullet points. So we need licensing for 525 employees, with 8 of those being system administrators. So we're getting super specific, saying we have 8 system admins and then a quantity on the number of employees as well. We also need normal licensing to be able to access all data and build out ad hoc reports. We're estimating that that's 5 per month. So we need to include that. It needs to have an integration with Salesforce. And we need, because that's another platform we use today, so it has to use that. And then we need automatic dashboards for 2 different stakeholders that can give us a status update for our data. So just kind of a high level, like, here's what we're doing. Vendor, please provide us with your solution. So here's a couple examples of how this could break out. So, and these are just random numbers. Don't take it for anything of what it's worth. This is not a real solicitation. I just made this up on the fly here. But so taking that scenario that was previously stated, we know that there's 517 because minus the 8 for sysadmins. So if we look at that, they've given us a quantity, so they're going to type in, the vendor should be putting in this quantity of 517. The cost per item, so per license, is $899 annually. Great, so they put that in, perfect. So we can do the math for a 5-year contract. Doing the math of everything for 517, it's $2,323,915. So that's where it brings us to the total over there. So you can do that as you go down every line item here. So sysadmin licensing, the ad hoc reports, the integration with the Salesforce, the dashboards, all of these quantities are different, the cost per item. So some of them are 5 years, some of them are just a one-time purchase. So it's kind of all over the place, but the math adds up and makes sense to give us that total 2.5 million. We'll just round up for easy conversation. Versus kind of the wrong way is if we just said, give us your cost per license or per thing, per item, because we don't care. We just, how much does it cost for one thing? So now you can see the difference is we're saying, okay, for one license, $899. Well, I also in my solicitation, I didn't ask for a 5-year contract. I just said, how much does it cost per year? So I'm only getting $899. And then same thing with all the other line items. So we can still get a dollar amount and it still kind of makes sense, but it's not a true picture of exactly what we're trying to accomplish. It gets the point across of the cost that they're trying to do, and it could be possible, but it's maybe just not the best way to do it. So now, earlier when we had an actual value of, you know, what realistically we would pay, 2.5 million, this is showing 61,398. So it's a big difference to where, and obviously I know you guys are way smarter than this, but if we didn't think about all the math behind it, we might come to a conclusion that like, oh, great, this is only going to cost us $61,000. Perfect. Then once we start crossing the T's, dotting the I's, and we see the big picture of, oh, no, we don't have budget because we thought we budgeted $100,000 when really it's going to be 2.5 million over the next 5 years. So we can only use this for 1 year instead of 5 years or whatever it may be. So this is one scenario when you're kind of considering and going through from a budget perspective. Any questions about this and kind of the math behind what I did here? Not that it really matters, but hopefully that paints a picture of giving you specific with quantity, giving specific line items here to say, you know, it's all these different things with the integration, and you're considering all these different things rather than a lot of the time what we see with specifically with platforms and with licensing is because we have these on state contract, which is great, but unfortunately a lot of the times what happens is they'll just say, okay, I just need 500 licenses and I'm good. Well, we didn't consider consulting fees and how much is it going to cost to implement this and how much is it going to cost to build out reports and these dashboards and the sysadmin licenses, because those are more expensive. So just keeping in mind, once again, that we really want to be specific with these.
Do you have a suggestion, Justin, if, say, the quantity is not yet fully known, say that 500 licenses, the agency doesn't want to be stuck in a position that they've committed to 500 licenses with the vendor, or the reverse, they've outlined 500 or so, that they're not limited, say they expand as an agency and now they need do 15 more licenses? How would they account for that in the cost evaluation?
Yeah, great question. And that's where I'll answer it in kind of two different parts. So I came back to this slide because a scenario, so when we're evaluating cost, and it allows for this in our code and rule, that we are strictly only evaluating cost from a scoring perspective. And so we're not committing when we say, I should have used the word hypothetical because that is exactly what it is. It's a hypothetical number of 525 employees. It's not a guarantee that this is how many licenses we'll be buying. It's our best guess. It's a hypothetical. And now to get into kind of the second part of that answer, best guess, we need to use historical data. So today we have some system that we're using, and we know that we have 500 employees, and we know that we're going to hire 25 new ones. So our best guess is 525. So that's where the hypotheticals come in, and then historical data comes in to both use those to our advantage to say, here's our best guess of what we're trying to accomplish and do. But please do recognize that, yeah, when we are posing these as a cost methodology, it strictly is just for the scoring of the cost, and we're not being held accountable to that. Once they've been awarded a contract, then we get into the specifics of, okay, now I need a quote super specific for this and this and this. That's what I'm going to buy. And the reason why we do that is once contracted, and even during their proposal, they may say something to the effect of, well, you may think that you need 500 licenses, but we could probably cut that in half because there's a public dashboard that anybody can use, and you don't even need a license for it. So you only need, 250 licenses instead of the 500 or whatever it may be. So depending on how you phrase it, the outcome could be totally different. Does that help answer your question, Solomon?
Yes, thank you, Justin.
Yeah, thank you for the question. What a great question. Almost like it was staged, but it wasn't, by the way. I wish it was. Any other questions? Okay. So now I'll get into quantity. Quantity does matter. And this kind of ties in with what I was just talking about, to where the historical data that you have is really going to be beneficial, because real life scenario, this is what I came into, is that I did a solicitation and I just asked for a quantity of one. How much is it per widget, per thing, per license, whatever it is? Because I thought, well, it doesn't matter if I'm buying 1 or 1 million. I just need to know how much does it cost, and I can buy X amount of licenses later on. But it does matter, and here's why. So as quantities increase, so does your cost savings. Think about like volume discounts. Think about the potential of maybe one vendor says that it's only, and I'm going to get into some numbers here in just a second, but maybe one vendor says, okay, it's only going to cost you 10 cents per license. A different vendor is 20 cents, so they're double the price. But now that I start timesing it by 1 million or maybe 10 million, because it's a license for everybody in the state or something crazy, then that makes a big change, and there's could potentially be volume discounts. You're maybe not considering the other fees that are included in that. So let's get into it. Here's just a scenario. Once again, random, doesn't really apply to any specific solicitations. It took the learning experience that I had from my solicitation, but numbers are totally different. So I should have labeled this a little bit different, but the 2 line items, I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but the first line item is like vendor 1, and then the second would be vendor 2. So vendor A, vendor B. Vendor A, it just has no cost for other items, but they're at 21.021 cents. So fractions of pennies here is what we're talking about, super low. But then vendor B has a $50,000 cost, but is lower at the per widget situation. So like if we're just taking per widget situation, this vendor would be cheaper, but because of that $50,000, you can see they're more expensive and like astronomically more expensive. So if I used that methodology right there, vendor B would lose by a landslide just because of that $50,000. But so quantities, as you can see in that first column, as you start to increase the quantities, it starts to make a difference. So if it's 1,000 with the ratios of, you know, cents and pennies here, it doesn't really make a difference here because $21 versus $50,000 and still not a big deal. When we get into the millions though, now we're starting to make a difference. So the quantities are increasing. As they continue to increase, the more savings we get. So $21,000, $65,000. So still a big difference. You know, vendor A would still win in this situation, I guess, if we're just doing a one vendor award. But once again, as you continue to that last item, so now we're at 10 million quantity, and that's just the random numbers that I came up with. It probably wouldn't have to be 10 million before you can get these savings. So don't worry about that. I'm just pulled up random numbers. But now you can see the tables turn to where vendor A is now more expensive at $210,000 and vendor B is winning at $200,000. This is more common of what we see is that we're just not considering volume discounts with quantities, and we're not considering the historical of what we're actually buying. So had we done the first line at 21 cents versus $50,000 and 15 cents, obviously it's vendor A is going to win. But then as we use our historical data to say, yep, we've bought 10 million of these in the past, so here's the numbers, it still makes sense even with that other line item of $50,000 because the per cost item is lower. And I didn't even put an example of volume discounts. Typically what we see is as our quantities increase, the vendors are more willing to decrease that, you know, 21 cents or 15 cents down to even something lower and say, well, because you're buying so many, I'm going to do it for 10 cents or 5 cents, even cheaper, whatever it may be. And once again, total random numbers here doesn't really make sense. Any questions?
Justin, I have a question.
So I can barely hear you. I think it was Sherry that was talking. I can't tell quite.
I will try and talk much louder. Is that better? How do you deal with vendors who have annual increases on their contracts?
Yeah, great question. If it's a historical thing that you're aware of and you know, then absolutely put that as kind of a column to say what we've done actually is I've broken it down by year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. Historically, our contracts are 5 years. So I would break it out that way to say, what is your cost in year 1, and then what's your proposed cost in year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. That does 2 things for us. 1, it breaks it out so you can see that annual increase, and 2, it kind of holds them accountable to that proposal as well, because we can say, well, your proposed increase was only 5% year after year after year. And now if they try to come back to you and say, well, we need to raise it 10%, we can hold them to the fire and say, no, this is what your proposal said. You can only raise it by 5%. Does that help start to answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. That's where my brain was going. Wanted to make sure you guys are thinking the same way. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who didn't hear, Sherry's comment was annually, how do we break that out or include annual increase year after year? And so just to repeat again, my answer is break it out years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I don't have a demonstration of that necessarily on here, but that is our recommendation, and kind of how we've done it in the past is specifically calling out a column for years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A lot of vendors might put 0, and that's fine, but now we can hold them accountable to that as well. Great question. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, you guys are all experts then. I'll come to a conclusion here at the end and just kind of explain once again my lessons learned. And hopefully we can all admit that we're not perfect and we can continue to improve and acclimate to the new ways of doing things. I can certainly agree to that I'm happy to follow my sword and say, I messed up on this one that I did. And, you know, I was able to make a change, make it work. And now I know for the future reference of how I can be a better assistance to get better cost proposals, get more accurate cost proposals specific to our scenario, which is going to relate to more realistic of what we're actually purchasing. So once again, using those hypotheticals or a scenario to get the cost of exactly what we want, using quantities, and then using our historical data to be able to put that into our situation so that way they can see what we've historically done in the past, and the vendors are more willing to give us a volume discount because they know that we've bought 10 million in the past, or they know that we're hiring a bunch of new people and that's our anticipation. So they're willing to give us a better discount that way as well. So lots of different options. There's no right or wrong way, is one thing I'll end with here as well, but just keeping your mind open to all the potential options. Any other questions or comments? Maybe I missed something and I can learn from you guys as well. So any other comments? Okay, well, Solomon, I guess I'll kind of turn it back over to you. I am here to answer any questions, but I'll leave it back to you for now.
All right. Thank you, Justin. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you all for joining us here. Being 12:54, we're finished up here. Reminder, do send any certificate requests to directly to me, and I'll get those off to you. I've provided my email address in the chat here. For those who are finished, you're welcome to drop off. We do see a question did come in on guarantee pricing and a question mark. Do you have any comments on that, Justin? Just adding real quick, in our state purchasing solicitation templates, we do require vendors guarantee their pricing for a certain time period. Depends on the industry. The customary guarantee period is 1 year. Sometimes we go longer, shorter, but depends on the industry. But absolutely, Mike, good suggestion, including a price guarantee period.
Yeah, I would just reiterate your same comments there, Solomon, that historically we've kind of held a price guarantee for 1 year. Outside of that, though, we are flexible, knowing that, you know, the economy's change and things are changing. So we're willing to work with the vendors on that. But regardless of whatever you do, I think the biggest key is that you just have to be transparent about that. Whatever the guarantee is, you have to make sure that that's publicly posted with your solicitation. So if you're trying to have a guarantee for 5 years, you just have to make sure that that's publicly posted. There might be vendors that try to object to that. There might be vendors that are perfectly fine with it. It just kind of depends on the scenario, the situation of I guess, the genre of whatever you're trying to procure. So hopefully that helped answer your question there.
You have a hand raised from Mike Long.
Yeah, sorry, Justin. Yeah, I didn't provide a lot of context about guaranteeing the pricing, but I was thinking in terms of doing a market basket. It seems to me you'd want to make sure that pricing's guaranteed in what's submitted for the market basket, even though you are doing hypotheticals. I was just wondering if you had any additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question. So, and it does get a little bit tricky when you're doing market baskets, because as we talked about earlier, a market basket is just a small sample size of what could be the greater catalog. So a lot of the times what happens with market basket, and I didn't really display on it too much today, but a lot of the times what could be a potential cost methodology is like a discount off, or a percentage markup as well. A lot of the times we see that. And so in those situations, we will hold them accountable to saying, if you're going to offer a discount off, this is for the life of the contract. With the other situation, though, depending on how specific you can get in the market basket, I could still see us holding them accountable to that. Kind of like I was talking about, if we broke out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years and showed that individually, we could still hold them accountable to it, because we can say, here's our hypothetical. Quantities might change a little bit, but they're going to be pretty close. So with that being said, we're going to hold you accountable for 1 year. Still, once again, though, Mike, I think it's just, as long as you're transparent in the posting, you can kind of do whatever we want. We can hold them accountable to it. And historically, we still do try to at least hold them accountable for that 1 year.
Great. Thanks, Justin.
Yeah, you bet.
All right. Thank you, Justin. Thank you all. We'll go ahead and finish up the discussion here, stop the recording. Feel free to hang out here if you'd like, but we'll go ahead and finish up. Thank you all for spending your time with us.